The rain had stopped, but the ground hadn't forgiven it. It was still soft. Still breathing. Still waiting. Daniel Cross stood at the edge of the construction site with mud caked to his boots, staring at what used to be his biggest achievement and was now turning into his worst nightmare. $500,000, sinking, slowly, silently, relentlessly. The massive excavator, brand new, state-of-the-art, imported just 3 weeks ago, sat buried deep inside the marshy ground like a dying beast. Its long arm leaned sideways, frozen mid-motion, while its body had already sunk past the tracks every hour. It dropped deeper every minute. It got worse, and every second. Daniel felt his reputation sinking with it. Still going down, one of the engineers muttered, checking a measuring rod stuck beside the machine. Daniel didn't respond. He already knew. He didn't need numbers anymore. He could feel it. 3 days ago, everything had been perfect. The site had been cleared, the land surveyed, the foundation marked. Experts had approved the soil stability. Everything was green-lit, everything was safe, and then the ground collapsed. The excavator had driven forward like normal. And then suddenly crack. The surface gave way. The machine dropped, not slowly, not gradually. It fell, straight down into a hidden pocket of deep swamp beneath what looked like dry land. By the time the operator jumped out, the machine was already trapped. By the time help arrived, it was already too late. Daniel ran his hand through his hair. "We tried everything," he said quietly, almost to himself, but everyone heard it, because it was true. Day one. They brought in 2 heavy bulldozers, steel chains, maximum pull. The engines roared, the ground shook, the chains tightened and then snap. One chain broke, the other machines began slipping. The excavator didn't move even a centimeter. Day 2. They called in a recovery team, specialists, experts. Men who had pulled trucks out of rivers and cranes out of collapsed bridges. They arrived confident, left silent. Their industrial winch screamed under pressure. The cable stretched, the anchor system ripped out of the ground. The machine sank another 6 inches. Day 3. A crane, a massive one, but the operator took one look at the terrain and refused. "I'm not risking 2 machines," he said flatly. Now it was day 4, and hope was running out. "How much have we lost?" One engineer asked. Daniel finally answered, "About 30,000 a day. Including delays, labor, penalties, silence, insurance?" Someone else asked. Daniel gave a dry laugh. "Not covered." That was the moment everything changed, because that's when. A slow, rattling sound came from the road. At first, nobody paid attention. Construction sites were noisy. Machines moved all the time. But this sound was different. Not sharp, not mechanical, not modern. It was heavy, deep, rhythmic, like something old, something alive. Then someone turned. "What is that?" Heads followed. Conversations stopped, and one by one, every worker turned toward the dirt road. A small pickup truck rolled in first. Old, dust-covered, nothing special, but behind it something massive, something impossible, something that didn't belong in this time. It moved slowly, deliberately, each turn of its wheels grinding against the earth with a heavy metallic rhythm. Steam hissed from its sides. A low, deep chug echoed across the field, and then the whistle blew, a long, haunting sound that cut through the air like a voice from another century. Daniel frowned. "What is that?" No one answered, because no one there had ever seen anything like it. The machine rolled forward into full view, and suddenly, everything went quiet. It was enormous, towering, made of iron and steel. Its wheels were taller than a man, its body thick, heavy, powerful, pipes, valves, gears all exposed, all moving, all alive. Steam rose into the air, sunlight reflected off polished metal. It looked ancient and unstoppable, a steam engine. One of the older workers whispered, "But that's not possible." The machine came to a stop, and from its side, an old man climbed down. He moved slowly, carefully, but not weakly. Every step was steady, deliberate, confident. His clothes were simple, work-worn, hands rough, face lined by years not of weakness but of experience. He didn't rush, didn't hesitate, didn't ask permission. He just walked straight toward Daniel. "Morning," the old man said calmly. Daniel blinked. "Morning." The old man looked past him, straight at the stuck excavator, studying it, not judging, not guessing, understanding. "You've been trying to pull it out," he said. Daniel nodded. "Yes. Didn't work." "No," the old man paused, then said something that made every person there freeze. "I can get it out. Silence. A T first." No one reacted, because no one understood what they just heard. Then someone laughed, then another, and suddenly the entire crew was smiling, shaking their heads, murmuring. Daniel exhaled slowly, tired, frustrated. "Not in the mood. You can?" he asked. The old man nodded. "Yes." Daniel looked past him at the giant steam machine, then back at him. "That thing?" he said. The old man smiled slightly. "That thing." One of the engineers stepped forward. "Sir, we use machines 10 times more powerful than that. It didn't even move." The old man didn't argue, didn't defend, didn't explain. He just said, "You used the wrong kind of power." That made Daniel pause. "What do you mean?" he asked. The old man looked at the excavator again, then at the mud, then back at Daniel. "You tried to pull fast," he said. "You needed to pull strong." Daniel crossed his arms. "And that machine can do that?" The old man nodded. "It doesn't rush," he said quietly. "It doesn't quit. It doesn't care how long it takes." Then he added, "It just pulls. Until the job is done." The wind moved across the site, carrying steam into the air. No one laughed this time, because something in his voice didn't sound like guessing, didn't sound like hope. It sounded like certainty. Daniel looked at his engineers. They didn't speak, because they had no better idea. He looked back at the old man, studied him, measured him, doubted him, and then finally said, "All right." A pause. "Show me." The old man gave a small nod, turned, and walked back toward the machine. And that was the moment everything changed. The construction site had gone completely still, as if even the wind had paused to watch what was about to happen. The men who had spent the last 4 days fighting the mud now stood in quiet anticipation, their earlier laughter replaced by a strange mix of curiosity and doubt. In front of them, the old man climbed back onto his machine, not with hesitation, but with the calm confidence of someone who had done this kind of thing his entire life. The steam engine let out a low hiss, like it was waking up after a long sleep, and for a brief moment it felt less like a machine and more like something alive. Daniel folded his arms and watched closely, trying to convince himself that this was just another failed attempt waiting to happen. His mind was filled with numbers, costs, losses, deadlines, but something deeper inside him, something he didn't want to admit, was beginning to pay attention. There was something different about the way the old man moved, something steady and unshaken. It wasn't the confidence of a man trying to prove something, it was the certainty of a man who already knew. The old man adjusted a series of valves, checked the pressure gauges, and gently placed his hand on the throttle. Steam curled into the air, rising slowly, almost gracefully, as the machine began to build power. It didn't roar like the modern engines Daniel was used to. It didn't scream or shake violently. Instead, it produced a deep rhythmic sound, a slow, powerful heartbeat that echoed across the site. The kind of sound that didn't rush, didn't panic, didn't waste energy. It simply existed, waiting for the moment to act. "Why isn't it moving?" one of the younger workers whispered. "Because it's not ready yet," replied an older man beside him, his eyes fixed on the engine, that kind of machine. "You don't rush it." Daniel glanced at them, slightly irritated, but he said nothing. His attention returned to the old man, who was now watching the pressure gauge with absolute focus. Seconds turned into minutes, and just when it began to feel like nothing would happen, the old man slowly eased the throttle forward. The response was immediate but not dramatic. The engine didn't lurch. It didn't jerk. It simply began. The massive rear wheels turned with deliberate force, their steel edges digging into the ground, gripping it with a kind of authority no one there had seen before. The earth beneath them didn't crumble, it responded. The machine moved forward slowly, each inch churned, each movement controlled. A heavy chain, thick and weathered, stretched from the engine toward the trapped excavator, lying half buried in the mud like a fallen giant. The chain tightened, then it hummed. The sound wasn't loud, but it was powerful. It carried tension, weight, and something else, something that felt almost like determination. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Here we go," he muttered under his breath, expecting the same result he had seen again and again over the past few days. Nothing happened, for a moment. Then something did. The excavator shifted, just barely, so small that at first no one was sure if it had actually moved or if it was just their imagination. "Did you see that?" someone whispered. I think it moved." Daniel didn't speak, but his eyes widened slightly. He stepped closer, his boots sinking slightly into the damp ground as he focused on the machine. The old man didn't look back. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even react. He simply pushed the throttle a little more. The engine responded with a deeper, stronger rhythm. The wheels turned again, gripping harder, refusing to slip. The chain pulled tighter, vibrating under the growing tension. And then the excavator moved again. This time there was no doubt. A full inch, maybe more. The mud around it shifted, releasing its grip ever so slightly, as if something stronger had finally challenged it. The site erupted not in noise, but in disbelief. Men stared, frozen in place, trying to process what they were witnessing. Machines worth millions had failed. Experts had failed. Calculations had failed. And yet this old machine was doing the impossible. Daniel felt something twist inside his chest. Not fear, not panic, respect. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. The old man kept going, slow, steady, unstoppable. The engine didn't rush, didn't strain wildly. It worked like it had been built for this exact moment, like this was the kind of job it had been waiting for all its life. The ground behind the wheels churned, but the machine never lost grip. It didn't spin uselessly like the modern equipment. It held on and pulled. The excavator began to rise. At first, it was subtle, a slight lift, a small release. Then the mud started to give way with a deep sucking sound, like it was finally letting go of something it had claimed as its own. The trapped machine shifted forward again, this time more noticeably, its buried tracks beginning to emerge from the dark sludge. Impossible. One of the engineers whispered, but it was happening, right in front of them. The old man adjusted the throttle again, his movements precise and controlled. He wasn't forcing the machine. He was working with it, understanding its limits, guiding its strength. The engine responded like a loyal partner, delivering power not in bursts but in an endless, steady stream. Foot by foot, inch by inch, the excavator came free. Mud poured off its sides, water splashed, the ground trembled slightly under the weight being shifted, and then with one final powerful pull the machine broke free completely. The silence that followed was overwhelming. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke, and no one even breathed. Then, slowly, reality returned. The excavator was out, not halfway, not barely, completely out, sitting on solid ground, alive, saved. Daniel stood frozen, staring at it like he was seeing something impossible become real. His mind struggled to catch up with what his eyes had just witnessed. All the plans, all the calculations, all the modern systems he trusted so deeply, none of them had worked. But this had. The old man slowly eased the throttle back, letting the engine settle down. The powerful rhythm softened, the steam hissed gently into the air, and the massive machine came to a calm stop as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. He sat there for a moment, quiet, composed, as the last traces of effort faded into stillness. Then, he reached up and pulled the whistle. The sound echoed across the land, long and proud, cutting through the silence like a declaration, not of victory, but of truth. And in that moment, every person on that site understood something they would never forget. Power isn't always loud. Strength isn't always fast, and sometimes the oldest way is the strongest one. For a long moment after the whistle faded into the distance, no one moved. The construction site, which had been filled with noise, frustration, and urgency for days, now stood in a strange and overwhelming silence. It wasn't the silence of confusion anymore, it was the silence of realization. Every man standing there knew they had just witnessed something far beyond a simple recovery job. They had seen something they couldn't explain, something that challenged everything they believed about progress, power, and what truly worked in the real world. Daniel Cross was still staring at the excavator, but his expression had completely changed. The frustration that had been carved into his face for days was gone, replaced by something much heavier. His shoulders, once tense with pressure and pride, now seemed slightly lowered, as if something inside him had quietly shifted. He wasn't just looking at the machine anymore, he was replaying every decision he had made over the past 4 days, every moment he had dismissed alternative ideas, every time he had trusted speed and technology without question. And now, standing in front of him, was proof that he had been wrong. Around him, the workers slowly began to come back to life. Some walked closer to the excavator, touching it like they needed to confirm it was real. Others stood near the steam engine, examining it with a level of respect that hadn't existed before. Just hours ago, they had seen it as an outdated relic, something that belonged in history books and museums. Now they looked at it like it was something far greater, a machine that had quietly carried knowledge from another time, waiting for the right moment to prove its worth again. The old man remained where he was, sitting calmly. On the platform of the steam engine, he didn't celebrate, didn't seek attention, and didn't react to the stares around him. His focus was on the machine itself, gently adjusting a valve, checking the pressure as it settled back into a resting state. To him, this wasn't a miracle. It wasn't even surprising. It was simply a job done correctly. Daniel finally moved. His steps were slow, deliberate, and for the first time since the crisis began, there was no urgency in them. He walked past his team, past the excavator, and stopped in front of the steam engine. For a few seconds, he didn't speak. He just looked at it, really looked at it. The details, the craftsmanship, the raw, unapologetic strength in its design. There were no screens, no sensors, no digital systems trying to control it. It was simple, but not in the way he had once thought. It wasn't simple because it lacked intelligence. It was simple because it didn't need anything unnecessary. Finally, Daniel looked up at the old man. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than before, stripped of its earlier sharpness. "I misjudged you," he said. There was no hesitation, no attempt to soften the truth. It was direct and honest, something that didn't come easily to a man who had spent years being right. The old man met his eyes, not with pride, not with satisfaction, but with calm understanding. "You didn't know," he replied simply. "Most people don't." Daniel let out a slow breath, nodding slightly as he processed that. "I thought more power meant better results," he admitted. "I thought newer meant stronger." He paused for a moment, then looked back at the excavator, but none of that worked. The old man leaned slightly against the railing of the engine, his gaze shifting briefly toward the mud where the excavator had been trapped. "There's different kinds of strength," he said, "the kind that moves fast. And the kind that doesn't stop." His words weren't spoken like a lecture or a correction. They were spoken like something learned through years of experience, something tested again and again until it became truth. Daniel listened carefully, not interrupting this time. There was no defense left in him, no need to argue. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't trying to prove anything, he was trying to understand. The old man continued, his voice steady. Your machines are built to protect themselves. They stop when things get too hard. They adjust, they pull back, they avoid damage. That's smart design. He paused, then added, but sometimes the job doesn't need protection. Sometimes it needs commitment. Daniel felt those words land heavier than anything he had heard all week. Commitment. It wasn't something you could measure with numbers or calculate with software. It wasn't programmed. It wasn't automated. It came from something else entirely. The old man gently tapped the side of the engine with his hand. This machine doesn't. Think about quitting, he said. It doesn't decide when something is too much. It just does what it was built to do. He looked back at Daniel. The only limit is the person running it. Those words stayed in the air long after he finished speaking. They weren't loud, but they carried weight, real weight, the kind that changes how a person sees things. Daniel turned his head slightly, looking back at his team. He saw their expressions: respect, disbelief, and something else. Inspiration, not from the machine alone, but from what it represented. For days, they had been fighting the problem with frustration, trying to force a solution. But what they had just witnessed wasn't force it. Was patience, understanding, and the right kind of power applied in the right way. He turned back to the old man, and this time there was no trace of the earlier doubt in his eyes. How did you know it would work? He asked. The old man gave a small smile, not proud, not arrogant, just certain. Because I've seen it before, he said. Different places, different situations. But the same mistake every time. People think harder problems need faster solutions. He shook his head slightly. Sometimes they just need the right one. Daniel let out a quiet breath, absorbing every word. He realized that what had just happened wasn't just about a machine being pulled out of the mud. It was about a mindset being pulled out of something much deeper, something he hadn't even realized he was stuck in. Around them, the site was slowly returning to activity, but it wasn't the same as before. The energy had changed. There was less noise, less chaos, and more awareness. Men moved with a different kind of focus, as if they had learned something without being formally taught. The old man began preparing the engine to move again, making small adjustments, ensuring everything was stable. Daniel watched him for a moment, then spoke again. What do I owe you? He asked. The old man didn't even look up at first. Nothing, he said calmly. Daniel frowned slightly. You just saved me from a loss that could have shut this project down. That's not nothing. The old man finally looked at him. Then don't pay me, he said. Learn from it. His tone wasn't demanding, but it was firm. That'll be worth more. Daniel stood there in silence, realizing that this wasn't a man who valued money the way most people did. What he offered wasn't a service, it was knowledge, experience, and something that couldn't be bought. After a moment, Daniel nodded slowly. I will, he said, and for the first time in a very long time, he meant it. The old man gave a small nod in return, then turned his attention back to the machine. The engine began to move again, slowly rolling forward as he guided it away from the site. The heavy wheels turned with the same steady rhythm, the same unshakable grip. It didn't rush, didn't hurry to leave. It simply moved, just as it had worked. As it reached the edge of the site, the old man pulled the whistle once more. The sound echoed across the open land, carrying with it something more than just noise. It carried a message, one that didn't need to be explained. Daniel stood there, watching the machine disappear down the road, feeling something he hadn't expected. Not relief, not victory, but growth. The kind that doesn't come from success, the kind that only comes after being proven wrong. The project resumed the very next day, but nothing about it felt the same. The machines were still there, the schedules still tight, and the pressure still real, but something invisible had shifted beneath it all. The men worked differently now, not slower, not faster, but with a kind of awareness that hadn't existed before. They measured more carefully, questioned more openly, and for the first time in a long while, they didn't assume they already had all the answers. Daniel Cross noticed it immediately, because the biggest change was inside him. For years, he had built his reputation on speed, efficiency, and results. He had trained himself to trust data over instinct, systems over experience, and modern solutions over anything that came from the past. That mindset had made him successful. It had built his company, earned him contracts, and given him confidence. But now, standing in the middle of that same construction site, he realized something he had never allowed himself to consider before. Success doesn't mean you know everything. Sometimes it just means you haven't been challenged in the right way yet. He found himself thinking about the old man more than he expected. Not just about what he had done, but how he had done it. There had been no rush, no panic, no attempt to overpower the problem. Just patience, understanding, and a quiet belief that the solution already existed if you knew where to look. That idea stayed with Daniel. As the days passed, shaping the way he approached every decision, every challenge, every unexpected problem that came his way. A week later, the excavator was fully cleaned, inspected, and back in operation. On the surface, it looked like everything had returned to normal. But Daniel knew better. Every time he saw that machine, he remembered how close he had come to losing it and how something he had almost dismissed as useless had been the only thing capable of saving it. It wasn't just a lesson in machinery. It was a lesson in humility. A few days after the incident, Daniel made a decision that surprised even himself. Early in the morning, before the site became active, he got into his truck and drove down the same road where the old steam engine had first appeared. The drive was quiet, the fields stretching endlessly on both sides, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower. It took him nearly 40 minutes to reach the small farm at the end of the road, a place that looked untouched by modern urgency. He parked his truck and stepped out, taking in the surroundings. The barn stood tall but aged, the wooden fences slightly worn, and behind it all just visible through the open shed doors was the machine. The steam engine.it stood still, silent, resting, but even at rest it carried a presence that was impossible to ignore. Daniel walked closer, his steps slower now, not out of hesitation but out of respect. The closer he got, the more details he noticed. The thickness of the metal, the precision of the joints, the way every part seemed built not just to function but to endure. It wasn't designed for convenience, it was designed for purpose. The old man was there, working near the side of the engine, cleaning a section of the wheel with a cloth. He didn't seem surprised to see Daniel. He simply glanced up briefly, then continued what he was doing. "You came back," he said calmly. Daniel gave a small nod. "I had to." There was no rush in the conversation, no formal introduction, no unnecessary words, just two men standing in front of a machine that had quietly changed something between them. Daniel looked at the engine for a moment before speaking again. "I've been thinking about what you said," he admitted, "about strength and commitment." The old man nodded slightly, still focused on his work. "Good," he replied. "Most people don't think about it long enough." Daniel let out a small breath, then said something that would have been impossible for him just weeks earlier. "I realized I've been solving problems the wrong way." That made the old man pause, not in surprise but in acknowledgement. He set the cloth aside and leaned lightly against the wheel, finally giving Daniel his full attention. "Not wrong," he said, "just incomplete." Daniel frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" The old man gestured toward the engine. "This machine isn't better than yours," he explained, "and yours aren't worse than this. They're different." He paused, letting that settle. "The problem is when people believe only one way works." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding forming in his mind. For years, he had built his identity around being ahead, being modern, being advanced, but in doing so, he had unknowingly limited himself, cutting off entire ways of thinking simply because they came from a different time. "I want to learn," Daniel said finally. The old man studied him for a moment, as if measuring the weight behind those words. Then he gave a small, approving nod. "Then start by listening," he said. "Not to me, to the work." That sentence stayed with Daniel long after he left the farm that day. Over the following months, things began to change, not dramatically, not overnight. But steadily, Daniel started involving his team differently, encouraging ideas instead of dismissing them. He paid closer attention to the conditions of each project, not just the data reports but the actual environment, the ground, the patterns that couldn't be measured on a screen, and perhaps most importantly, he stopped assuming that the newest solution was always the best one. Word of what had happened at the site spread further than Daniel expected, not as a story of failure but as a story of something extraordinary. Contractors, engineers, and even competitors heard about it. Some laughed, some questioned it, but many became curious. And slowly, the idea began to take root that maybe progress wasn't just about moving forward, but also about remembering what worked before. Daniel returned to the farm more than once after that, sometimes to ask questions, sometimes just to observe. Each visit added something new, not just knowledge, but perspective. He began to see that the old man wasn't just skilled, he was connected to something deeper. A way of working that wasn't rushed, wasn't distracted, and wasn't dependent on constant upgrades. It was built on understanding, patience, and respect for the work itself. Years passed, projects came and went. Technology continued to evolve, but Daniel never forgot that day, and neither did the people who had been there. Because some lessons don't fade, they settle, they grow, and they change the way you see everything after. On a quiet afternoon, long after the original project had been completed, Daniel stood on another job site, different location, different team, but a familiar situation. A machine had gotten stuck again, deep in unstable ground. The younger engineers around him began suggesting solutions: bigger machines, faster pulls, more advanced systems. Daniel listened. Then he smiled slightly. "Not this time," he said. He looked at the ground, then at the machine, and finally at the road leading into the site. "We're going to do this the right way." And for a moment, as the wind moved across the open land, he could almost hear it again, that deep, steady rhythm, that echo from the past, that reminder that some things don't become useless, they just wait until someone remembers their true value. Sometimes the world moves so fast that we forget what real strength looks like. We chase speed, upgrades, and complexity, believing they make us better. But real power isn't always about moving quickly, it's about never giving up when things get hard. It's about knowing when to push, when to wait, and when to trust something that others have already forgotten. Because in the end, it's not the newest solution that wins, it's the one that understands the problem best.